want to congratulate everyone for remaining with us. We are giving out Staccato prizes at the end, so I can think of 100 things we'd rather be doing at 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening. I'd like to commend the organisers for leaving the best till last. When I talk about Anarchy, I'm talking about a magazine published in London between 1961 and 1970. And unfortunately my eyes are not so good, I cannot see which one is mine there. There's some images of covers. Anarchy was edited by a very interesting writer and activist called Colin Ward, who was converted to anarchism serving in the armed forces. Unlike his colleagues, many of whom were conscientious objectors of the anarchist movement. So, can I make these bigger? No? Yeah. Carry on. Okay. So, where are we? We've touched on many of the issues touched on in all the sessions in the last 2 days. Obviously, some of the issues appear in the magazine journal Anarchy. So that's fact. Yeah. What do we do to change?
I'll do that. Just
I don't really want to change it at the moment. It's a bit small for people to see. That's the problem. Okay. So we were talking yesterday about the question of whether multi-party politics or single-party political systems, which one is the best. Now there is an alternative, no party politics. That is the philosophy of anarchism. So it's nothing. This tradition of the left has got nothing to do with Marxism. So I think this is the exception from of today. You know, it's the exception of this weekend's series of talks. Do you want to? I'd rather do it. I'd rather do it myself. Yeah. This is an issue of one. This is an issue. One big issue that they used to deal with was education was a big subject, the theme of running through all the issues of anarchism. It was a monthly journal, 32 pages. But this is the size of it. And education and housing were very big topics that were repeatedly covered. Philosophically, they tried to create a grassroots movement, particularly in the housing issue. They were trying to promote squatters' actions and resistance to the lack of housing. And I start the question of the six, and I want to give not an apology about about the paper that's on the paper on the website is only notes. This is an updated version. I don't know if that's been put up there yet, but I'm still working on this because I've only spent time going through each issue, so it's 12 issues per year for 10 years, so it's quite, you know, to count how many pages, it's quite a lot of stuff to go through, and so I will talk about what are the origins of anarchy and anarchism in the 60s. The origins, as far as I see, it's not 56. It's 1945 when the H-bomb is dropped, and that leads to a different kind of outlook amongst particularly youth. They think that the world could actually, you know, there could be no future. So there's that contradiction, which is a contradiction it contradicts with the period of affluence and hedonism, which becomes a trend amongst youth later on in the 60s. We cannot forget the question of the H-bomb and the politics around the CND, and a big role was played by Anarchy and anarchists within the Committee of 100. That was mentioned by someone yesterday. Nicholas Walter, who was one of the key editors and contributors to Anarchy, was involved in the Committee of 100, and also it's a topic frequently dealt with in the journal. I don't know if anybody has ever come across it. Only 3,000 copies were produced each month. The editor, at one point, he says his target was to get to 4,000. They never actually achieved that, and I think only on a few occasions did it actually sell out. I mean, there was one special issue on what is anarchy, and he specifically mentions that issue sold out. Now, question of the youth. I think youth is defined in the 50s and 60s by this cultural figure of the angry young man. It's very sexist, as we've seen. Let me flick through to another. Where's it gone? I wanted to show you another cover of the magazine. Maybe we get this to go forward.
Let's go off that.
Is it the third one along when you showed all three?
No, there's I want to go forward. I can't see what, because my eyes are not good enough. I can't see what's showing up now.
Sure, yeah.
Is this the forward button? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah. Okay, here we are. This is a special issue on Wilhelm Reich, which is Anarchy issue 105. And if you see the question, if you see what the lady's saying, she's saying orgasm, smorgasm. I don't know what smorgasm is, but perhaps someone can tell me. How about a good lay? It's not even funny as far as I'm concerned, but that seems to typify an attitude in the 60s. You know, it's regards to the neglect of feminism in on the left. And I think there's a neglect of feminism in the pages of Anarchy. I found very little that refers to questions of women's rights, women's movement, questions for housework issues, domestic issues, women's wages, women's employment. That's how women are represented. That's just not covered in there. Even the contributors, I would say probably 95% are men. So this question of the angry young man does set the decade. In the cinema, it's seen in films like The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner and Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. They're both written by Alan Sillitoe, who's a working class writer. He was part of the committee. He was part of the anti-war protest in the early 60s, and he features actually on the cover of the magazine. He was there, Alan Sillitoe. That's issue number 10. He's described by Nicholas Walter as a typically anarchist writer. So, but the image he presents of the working class, it's a male working class. It's a male kind of politics is a male domain. So that was just what. I'm not really going to have time to read any of that. Can I talk about the English tradition of anarchy as opposed to the European tradition? Recent writers such as David Goodway have written about anarchy, taking it back to William Godwin, and he mentions William Blake in passing, right up to more modern writers like John Cowper Powys. So there's a debate whether there's actually an English tradition in distinction from a European tradition of anarchy, the Spanish tradition of the anarcho-syndicalists, and the tendency to use militant, violent tactics, which is not seen in the English context. Although there's a question, one of the historians, Carissa Honeywell, does actually say that anarchy supported the Red Action Front by the Minehaf gang in the early 70s. But unfortunately, the journal actually finished it in 1970, so I could not find the actual. I've been through every single issue. I cannot find any reference to that in the issue. Either she's got the date wrong, or she's looking at she's mixing up some other journal. That's Carissa Honeywell, A British Anarchist Tradition, published by Bloomsbury in 2011. The anarchy that's presented in the pages of this magazine are very, very different from the contemporary anarchy in Britain, the recent period, represented by Black Flag and the direct action movement, and obviously class war with its cult of anger, ugliness, abusive behaviour and violence, which I would term punk anarchism. So this is more a kind of Goodway looks at it in terms of like a Levi-site view of anarchism, which is also almost a purely literary tradition. As I mentioned, the writers, and he mentions Colin Wald, obviously, is a professional editor and an architect by background, and also Walter is was a journalist, a commercial editor of the. I think yes, it's Times Literary Supplement, and also the Good Food Guide. I think he edited. So they had to make the money somehow. Okay, the Committee of 100 was an important issue, I mentioned that. I'll go on to now talk about anarchy on the left. Now the 60s are seen as an era of the new left. The anarchist tradition, it should be seen as part of the left. Their critique of the 60s is seen in the way their perspective on the Trafalgar Square demonstrations, and they're very critical of just holding one-off demonstrations. Obviously, people like Tariq Ali, who's associated with the Vietnam demonstrations, he wrote his autobiography. He called it Street Fighting Years. That was one of his. I don't know if he's written another autobiography. I think that was in the 80s that was written, and it's kind of a cult of the kind of a cliche that a bit mass demo. The Trafalgar Square demo come to represent the 60s. Another question which they do look at. How many? Only 5 minutes. Is the music, which someone touched on earlier. I think it was Matthew. Yeah. They're quite critical of the. Actually, there's a debate. There's no. One thing I should emphasise: anarchy doesn't have a party line, and certainly this journal doesn't have a party line. There's some articles that are critical of popular music, critical of the Woodstock. The culture of Woodstock, but there's also other writers who say that Woodstock is it's an embodiment of anarchism, because they create an alternative community. with it. But when you look at things like Glastonbury today, it's just a commercial, it's just a commercial enterprise. I don't think there's much political content to it whatsoever. So I think if we look at how it's changed, transformed itself, it doesn't actually make so much sense. I don't need to define anarchism, I'm assuming everyone knows what it is. So I'll skip those bits. There is an interesting quote which I found from Hobsbawm, who claims that the Bolsheviks were less anti-anarchists than the anarchists were anti-Marxists. But I think he's only talking about one particular period in history. In here, I don't see a particular anti-left or anti-Marxist perspective, or they are critical of the New Left Review kind of politics, particularly Raymond Williams, who's a kind of elder statesman of the New Left. Nicholas Walter criticised Williams. There's a famous book, The Long Revolution. He said it takes a very insular view of British culture. And he also is very dismissive of his style of writing. He said the book is almost unreadable. You have to read every sentence twice before it makes sense. Which I thought that was rather patronising. But anarchy is also, they're also quite rather critical of the anarchist tradition. There is one issue, I think I've got a picture of that one. It's a kind of dramatisation of a dialogue between Bakunin and this is about psychiatry, about O.D. Lang, which we were talking about earlier. That's a very I think very evocative image. All the images were done by one artist who was a British artist who was educated in Liverpool, called Rufus Seeger. And where's the one? Direct Action is another constant. Spain, 1936. Now this is an important historic period for anarchy. It's the only time in history where anarchism was put in practice in the pre-Franco age era of Spain, which Orwell writes about. Catalonia. This is education.
You've just passed it, Danny.
No.
The theatre one you wanted, the three people theatre.
Well, I think I'm just going to. I'll just go through the images. Otherwise, I won't have any time to describe. This is a front cover. What it's saying is confused. On the back cover, on the back cover is a revolutionary. No, he's been reading Anarchy. So these are some famous anarchists. This is the celebration of 1968. This is a street poster, and they define anarchy back to Greek philosophy. This is one issue on Greek philosophy. Maybe I didn't put the one up there. There's one special issue of a dialogue between Bakunin and Marx, which is kind of, it's not saying, they don't see Bakunin as a prophet. It's very open-ended. I've got to write it now.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Can I just summarise the influence of anarchy?
Extremely briefly.
Okay, anarchy dissolved in 1970, but the ideas continued. Some of I didn't mention the American influence with Maury Bookchin, who was an important writer, especially on the ecological aspect of anarchy, which he developed in his book Towards an Ecological Society. Now there's an anarchist movement. The anarchist movement today is quite strong. and it's even stronger. There's one particular direct influence between Bookchin and Abdullah Öcalan in Kurdistan. Öcalan's books, there's four of his books have been published in English, and he refers to Bookchin as an inspiration in the the war in Syria, in the northern Iraq, northern Syria. Called Rojava they're establishing a confederation based on the philosophy of Bookchin, or they're claiming to. It's actually put in the recent biography of Bookchin by Janet Beale, which was published in 2016. She actually refers to Öcalan quoting from Bookchin and writing a letter to Bookchin. But Bookchin didn't want anything to do with it. Anyway, that's where I'll draw a conclusion.
Thanks very much.